Here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back to the Morningstar. Oh, I can tell. We're on the air. Echo. And Peter Basulka, if you turn your camera on, we'll the three of us, the Three Musketeers, will take up this topic again. And if you have any questions for Dr. Bruce Cornet, just raise a hand, and we'll introduce the question. We've been reviewing the geological history of the splitting of Pangaea, the ancient continent that joined Africa, Europe, North America, with one big chunk of land, and then the rifts began and they split apart. The Atlantic Ocean was formed, and Bruce has been telling us during the first hour of some of his work in geology, specifically in oil prospecting, and how as a palynologist, that's an expert in pollen, he was able to determine sedimentary layers where there was greater likelihood of oil being found than other sedimentary layers where there would be no oil to be found. And he did this by classification and categorization of different types of pollen. During that period of time, he did a lot of geology and excavation in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts area. And he discovered a remarkable thing. He discovered fossilized fish. And when he was trying to find out which rock samples and rock sediments were radioactive, he inadvertently discovered that the fossil fish that he was finding up near Mount Tom in Massachusetts, and I believe in Connecticut, the fish fossils were radioactive. And this led to a remarkable discovery, which really changes the whole timeline of the evolution of life and how life evolved and how the dinosaurs grew big. So that's where we're going to take it up now. And I welcome Peter Basulka. And I also want to thank Peter Basulka for sharing with us his 9/11 experience. You heard my take on it. We lived it. We survived it. We must go on. I don't want to participate in these death cult rituals. And may they all rest in peace. I lost friends in the World Trade Center. We all did. We knew somebody that knew somebody. But life goes on, and we're going to talk about how life changes and life thrives. Even when life is extinguished in one region of the earth, it'll sprout up and continue in another way, and perhaps through mutation. So now Bruce is going to tell us why the dinosaur tracks grew bigger after the Triassic and into the Jurassic age. And that's what he was telling us at the end of the first hour. So Dr. Bruce Cornet, let's continue the saga. And I have to say, those dinosaurs look beautiful behind you.
Yes.
They really tell the story.
Right.
Peter, do you have any questions before we go on? Do you have any questions or comments on what Dr. Cornet said in the first hour?
No, I'm just soaking it all in. I thought it was interesting that his research was scientific evidence that life was transplanted from Mars to Earth, because I have a soul memory of that.
Well, I've said that for years, that we evolved here on Earth as descendants, progeny of the Martian remnant. Humanity, in my belief, as Bruce and I have been at this together for 30 years, along with Richard Hoagland, studying the evolution of life on Mars and on Earth and the extinction of life on Mars. And Dr. John Brandenburg, who wrote Death on Mars, discovered that Mars was destroyed, that life on Mars was obliterated, but I believe, that life on Mars still exists and that it went underground and that there is still water underground on Mars. And this has been proven by satellite probes that have used radar, ground penetrating radar. And about 15 years ago, NASA found a lake. It's not visible visually from outer space because it's covered with dust. And the reason it's covered with dust is that it's a frozen lake, but it was 125 miles long, which would qualify it as a small sea, and many, many meters deep. So we're, again, just like the moon, we're only being told not even half the story of Mars. But Dr. John Brandenburg found a radioactive isotope and other things like thorium and uranium scattered. And xenon-129. This is the radioactive isotope that only exists, it's created by nuclear explosions. So let's take this up now, and intriguing concepts for those of you who thought you evolved from monkeys. But remember what I say about science. The first trick of science was to convince you that you evolved from monkeys so that when they treat you like a monkey, you won't complain. So back to Dr. Bruce Cornet. Thank you, Bruce.
One of the aspects of the Triassic-Jurassic boundary turnover that occurs is that in some of the locations they have actually found spikes of iridium, and iridium only comes from outer space. And so that indicated that something had hit Earth, and the initial thought was that it was due to a meteorite or an asteroid that had hit Earth, but nobody could find any smoking gun crater like they do for the Chicxulub crater, that an asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. So then they tried to think that, or they thought that the gas that was coming out from the basalt flows that soon appeared in the rift basins, that CO2 gas was so much of it that it caused the mass extinction. But then they realized that these basalt flows didn't start to come to the surface until 50 to 100,000 years after the mass extinction boundary. And that's where I found this fossil fish that are highly radioactive. So when you put iridium and the turnover of life at that boundary and the radioactivity together, along with the sudden increase in the size of the dinosaurs that Dr. Paul Olson at Columbia University was able to determine and show. And I'd been with him in the field when and found some of the huge dinosaur tracks, three-toed tracks, right on top of the Triassic, the basal Jurassic. They're quite amazing. And so something caused the dinosaurs to increase in size by 2 to 3 times or more, and brought in the age of dinosaurs from that until the end of the Cretaceous. So you can
hold on a second, please.
Yes.
I have a question, but I also like to ask Peter to mute his mic because I hear some background noises. Yeah, that's okay. But the question I have is, please explain to us what the mass extinction boundary is and how far it extends and where it ends and why it ends. What is the mass extinction boundary?
Well, it is a layer within a sequence of rocks that contains a significant and rapid turnover of spores and pollen and other life forms, so that you don't get the same concentration and distribution of life forms above the boundary and below the boundary. It changes radically. And that is what I found in my thesis work at Penn State University.
Yeah. Perhaps we could touch upon how this mass extinction was not just of animals and fishes, but plants.
Yes.
I was reading your
75 to 85% of the plants that existed in the Triassic at the very top of the Triassic were before the boundary, the 75 to 85% of them disappeared overnight, literally. And the flora became very monotypic on top of the Triassic in the early Jurassic, with just a few types of conifers dominating the whole flora. Whereas in the Triassic, you had a lot of different types of seed ferns and conifers that existed in a diverse flora that supported a diverse reptilian fauna. And then after the boundary, you have just you have these huge plant-eating dinosaurs that were feeding on the conifers that took over the world, or at least took over North America, South America. If you go up and down the Americas from the North Pole to the South Pole, the same types of chirolepid conifers and Araucarian conifers became dominant throughout that range. But then the Chinese have found on the opposite side of the Earth that the floras were very diverse and contained lots of different types of ferns and tree ferns and water-loving plants on that side, and no mass turnover like you do on the Atlantic side. And one last thing that I realized from studying this is that the reason for all of the magma that came out of the Earth, and we now know that micronovas and macronovas, the radiation from them when a star sends out a solar blast, that radiation penetrates very deeply into Earth, into the crust, and causes the crust to melt. And it would have accelerated the rate at which the basalt, many tens of miles below the surface, would have melted, and then it would come, because it's when it's hot, it's lighter, and like a hot air balloon, the basalt would move and work its way to the surface and come flooding out into the basins as flood basalts. And so that there is a connection between the camp, or Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, and this micronova burst that killed off most of the Triassic animals and plants on just one side of the Earth, not all over the Earth. And that could also explain why the Jurassic in North America recovered much more quickly, because it wasn't an absolute extinction. It was just that you had to have a migration of plants and animals from the other side of the Earth over to our side, the Atlantic side.
Bruce, I'd like to ask you now about some modern geological events that I've been reading about for at least 5 years, and they have to do with events up in Siberia, which have been reported in scientific journals about basalts starting to upwell again and break out. And this included gigantic clouds of methane, which created a miasma over there near Siberia a couple of years ago that actually detonated, created a huge explosion. Fortunately, it's not a well-populated area, but this is something that's ongoing right now. There seems to be a lot of geological activity up near the North Pole in Siberia, the Bering Straits area. And some of these gigantic plumes of methane rose up and were spreading and were being felt, that is, smelled, in Alaska and Siberia. Do you know anything about that, or the current status of that phenomenon?
I have not studied that, Robert, but I do know that the Atlantic Ocean is widening in that area of the world. In other words, the rift that formed the ocean started down in and around the equator, and in between South and North America, and then Europe pulled away from Canada much later in time, and so that the sea width in the north is much narrower than it is in the south.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're talking now about the spreading of the ocean floor that is widening the Atlantic Ocean, pushing the continents apart. This has to do with the mid-Atlantic ridge. So I'd like to tell you a little anecdote that back when I was in the 6th grade, which was 1960, we were studying geography, and the teacher, Sister Eukarya, God bless her, put up a map of the Earth, and we could see North America, South America, Africa, and Europe. And I said, you know, sister, it looks to me like if this was a puzzle piece, Africa fits into North America almost as if they were together at one time, like puzzle pieces. And she said, oh, that's a very interesting idea, Robert. And they thought it was really strange. And then my friend, Michael Gentilesco, put up his hand and he said, oh, sister, you know, I was talking with my father and he told me that they're starting to believe that the continents were together a long, long time ago and have been spreading apart. And they've done measurements and they seem to be moving apart like 1 inch every 10 years. It was, and she goes, oh, that's really interesting, because they didn't believe in continental drift in 1960. And since that time, of course, we now know that the Earth is dynamic, it's expanding, it's growing. And little kids have insights, you know. It's just common. You look at the three continents, North America, South America, and Africa, and you can see where the puzzle pieces fit. As long as I'm here, we're talking about the lack of an explanation in traditional terms that you said geologists couldn't find a crater to explain the die-off. So I'd like to tell you a little discovery that I made back in 1998. I went to Stonehenge, midsummer ceremony with my friends, the Druid Order. And during the ceremony, I had an out-of-body experience. My soul was taken straight up, vertically, right up above Stonehenge into outer space. And I saw England, Africa, and Egypt. And I saw Cairo and a relationship between Cairo and Stonehenge. And this voice said to me, draw a triangle. So I drew a triangle from Stonehenge down to the 30th degree parallel of latitude, and a baseline across to Giza, and it gave me a triangle. Giza, Stonehenge, prime meridian, 30th degree of latitude. And the voice said, flip that triangle, mirror it, and see where it lands. And it was just a thought, and then I was back in my body. So when I came back to the United States, I got my Rand McNally maps, and I got a marker, and I drew that triangle, and I took measurements. So Cairo is 30 degrees east and on the 30th degree parallel of latitude. So I flipped it, and where does it land? It lands at 30 degrees west on the 30th degree parallel of latitude. And it's right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And I said, I wonder what's there. So, you know, my cousin, Mark Whitford, he and I were working very closely together then. And I said, hey, Mark, you know, I need to find out what's in there, because he was in the Navy. So he said to me, oh, Robert, you know, that's easy. I have a friend who works at the U.S. Geological Survey. He told me he can get me any chart and any map anywhere. And I said, you think he can get us a chart of the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean there? He said, yeah, he can get us anything. He's told me many times, any chart you need, I'll get it for you. So we made arrangements to go to his friend in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Geological Survey to ask for these maps. So a couple of weeks went by, and then he called me. He said, hey, I talked to my friend, and he's willing to get us the chart. Give me the coordinates that you would like, and I'll give them to him, and he'll give us the chart. So I said, okay, I'm really interested in these 4 regions of the Atlantic Ocean. So I gave him that one, and I gave him 3 others. He said, I'm going down Monday. He's waiting, we're going to have lunch, and you get me the charts. So he goes that Monday, has lunch with his friend. Then he calls me a few hours later, and I said, hey, did you get the charts? He said, well, no. I said, what do you mean? Your friend said he was going to get them. He said, yeah, I gave him the coordinates and he disappeared. He went away for about 20 minutes. And when he came back, he said to me, hey, Mark, who is this guy, your cousin? And he said, well, it's my cousin Robert. You know, he's a guy. He's interested in a lot of interesting things in science. And he said, why? He said, Mark, there are only 4 regions of the Atlantic Ocean that are still classified top secret by the U.S. Navy, and your cousin just asked for 3 of them. And that put the end of that research. But a year later, Lamont Doherty Laboratory put out a CD-ROM that was called Small Blue Planet. And it was the first time that the entire Earth had been charted and mapped, both the land and undersea. So I bought it and I threw it in my computer. And the first thing I went to look for was what's in the Atlantic Ocean at 30 west and 30 north. Guess what I found? You'll never guess. But I think I've told you, but maybe you've forgotten. I went into that and I found 3 seamounts. One was called the Plato Seamount. The other one was called the Atlantis Seamount. And lo and behold, right alongside the Atlantis Seamount, the U.S. Navy named a table mount the Great Meteor Table Mount. And I said to myself, why would they call this table mount the Great Meteor Table Mount, and it's 9,000 feet under the surface of the Atlantic Ocean? And I think I discovered what destroyed Atlantis. So back to you. And after the show, or maybe tomorrow, I'll send you some charts I've done with Google Earth, because we're planning to do a program on how I found Atlantis, guided by Stonehenge. So back to you. And that's God's Honest Truth. Now you can look it up on Wikipedia. You can type in Plato Seamount, Atlantis Seamount, and Great Meteor Table Mount, and ask yourself, how did a great meteor get on a table mount 9,000, between 6,000 and 9,000 feet under the Atlantic Ocean? Back to you, Bruce. I just had to share that with you.
Thank you, Robert. That's very interesting.
You're welcome.
Right now, what we're talking about is the transition to the age of dinosaurs and the amount of change in the plant taxa that occurred in South America, North America, compared to that of Eastern Asia and Africa, etc. That we have a lot of diversity that persisted into the Jurassic at that particular time. And we do know that the dinosaurs could tolerate cold, and they could live in the northern latitudes fairly easily, even though they were only partially warm-blooded. And we're finding all sorts of data now that is changing our ideas about the history of Earth. And nobody knew that there was any Jurassic age rocks on the East Coast until my thesis work was done. And then everybody thought that the mass extinction at the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, called the ETE, had to have been caused by a meteorite. And now we're finding that there are multiple ways in which life on this Earth can be radically altered very quickly. But most important is that the level of CO2 in the atmosphere is not the primary cause of global warming, even though you might think so. It's mostly methane. And we're finding out that during the last interglacial, because of ice cores in Antarctica and Arctic, especially the Arctic and Greenland, have shown that in the middle of the last interglacial, the glacial periods come and go on approximately a a 26,000 year cycle. Every 26,000 years, you have a 108,000 year cycle of ice age, where the northern hemisphere ice cap grows extraordinarily large, all the way down and gets into the 48 contiguous states. And while they've assumed that the Antarctic ice cap grew also, and what other scientists have looked at is said, wait a minute, we have evidence of tropical climate down in Antarctica during the last ice age. And the ice cores show that in the middle of the last interglacial, there was a period of global warming where the global temperatures rose 3 to 5 degrees centigrade above what they are today. And so this paranoia about global warming is really nothing more than a ploy to control humanity. And we're never going to see electric cars replace fossil fuels. That's for sure.
Well, I agree. Since we brought up this phenomenon in Antarctica that is resulting in the discovery of tropical plant fossils, and some of it's not really fossilized, it's just flash frozen vegetation.
That's right.
Which means that Antarctica was once in a tropical region of the Earth. And what you've just hinted at by describing this growth of the
northern ice cap,
the northern ice cap, harkens back now to the Hapwood Einstein theory.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that. This is one of the most fascinating theories. It's always played down. It's kind of a hush hush. We don't want to scare the world. But
as a geologist, I do not like the idea that Hapgood proposed and others, that Antarctica moved 70 degrees latitude further north after the last ice age. In other words, they thought it was further south. And I discovered another mechanism that would account for this and how the northern hemisphere could have such a huge ice cap. And that's the orientation of the Earth relative to the sun. That during an ice age, the tilt of the Earth hasn't changed radically, from about 23 to 25 degrees from true north, but the Earth was allowed to rotate on its vertical axis, its orbital axis, whereas while the Earth is today during the interglacial is frozen into its orientation, vertical orientation, and thus you have the Earth during an interglacial does not rotate on its orbital axis, and this means that we're going to have 4 seasons.
Let's stop there for a second. Let's explain to the audience that the Earth has 2 north poles, a geographic North Pole and a
magnetic North Pole.
Also, let's talk about this amazing coincidence that the tilt of the Earth, 23.5 degrees, is just 1 degree off the tilt of Mars, and all the other planets have different alignments. Venus spins. On Venus, the day is longer than the year. It takes Venus longer to rotate once, than it takes it to go around the sun in 1 year. Let me pick your brains. What do you think about those anomalies or similarities?
Well, I tried to come up with some sort of a mechanism that would explain how you could get the North Pole expanding and the South Pole ice contracting and it becoming tropical. And what I realized that during an ice age, the south pole of Earth has to be pointed towards the sun all the time, and that the Earth rotates like the moon around the sun, always rotating on its vertical axis 360 degrees. So you have the North Pole pointing away from the sun and in darkness. So at the North Pole, during an ice age, the sun never rises, whereas at the South Pole, the sun never sets.
Now let's tell people about what Hapgood and Einstein concluded, which is a little different than what Bruce is explaining. The Hapgood-Einstein theory hypothesized that the mass of the ice on the North Pole and the ice cap there and the southern ice cap grew and grew and grew so heavy and so dense and so thick that eventually the momentum of it forced the Earth to the crust to tilt, to slide, and move Antarctica from a tropical region to where it is now.
And
But you take exception to that. So tell us your theory.
Major exception to that, because there's no geologic evidence to support it, none whatsoever. And if any such movement had ever occurred, with that much plate tectonic shift, that continental shift, the earthquakes that would have resulted from that would have devastated everything on Earth, just leveled it completely. I mean, you would have had a Richter scale 12 running for nonstop year after year after year, never stop shaking in order to make that happen, because the continental crust just can't slip like that. It's not greased at the Moho discontinuity, so it's not going to move and back and forth. But the tilt of the Earth can change, and I believe it has changed, and that is the explanation why if during an ice age, the place to go is Antarctica, because that will have a tropical climate. You go up to the North Pole and you're frozen solid.
Well, let me explain to you my idea. Your idea makes sense to me. You're talking about the Earth having been rotating with the South Pole always pointing toward the sun, the North Pole always away from the sun. So what's the mechanism that tilted the Earth and put it in its present position? I would say that the formation of the Pacific Ocean by the hypothetical collision of Theia with the Earth that gouged out the Pacific Ocean basin carried away a lot of the material of which was solid ground then. When this planetoid, Theia, struck the Earth, it was a cosmic collision, gouged out the basin of the Pacific, carried off debris that went into orbit, and this debris, which formed the moon, was a composite of material from Theia, the planetoid, and debris that was excavated by the impact that gouged out the Pacific Ocean and formed it. And that, in my estimation, would have been enough to tilt the Earth so that the South Pole would not be pointing at the sun anymore, but tilted down and become Antarctica where it is today. What do you think of that idea?
Well, you're talking about things that happened 4 billion years ago on Earth, not happened for 40 million years ago.
You think the Pacific is that old, that the Pacific Basin was that old?
Well, the Pacific Ocean has spreading centers just as the Atlantic Ocean does, and subduction zones where the Pacific Ocean is actually closing and getting smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. Most of the mountain ranges on the western half of the United States are caused by the Pacific plate being thrust underneath the continental plate and causing all of the disruption of rocks to form mountain chains on from Colorado on west. But the important thing that you need to take into consideration is that the change in orientation of the Earth between the ice ages, which lasted approximately 108 to 110,000 years, and the interglacials, which lasted only 21 to 21,600 years, that this is a result of the wobbling of the sun, not the wobbling of the Earth. And when the Earth is aligned, its orbit is aligned with that of the ecliptic of the sun, you have the Earth immersed within the accretion disk of the sun. And what happened there in the accretion disk during the formation of our solar system? It caused the particles to be able to clump together in one particular direction, but not in all directions. As a result, the Earth can, when it's aligned, its orbit is aligned with the ecliptic, it will not rotate on its vertical axis. It is braked, much like a disc brake. But when because the sun wobbles and the accretion disk rises above and below the planes of the planets, when there is no alignment with our orbit, the Earth can rotate freely on its orbital axis. It is not braked. And the Earth is not uniform in mass distribution. Most of the mass of the Earth is in the southern hemisphere. Most of the southern hemisphere is the water world, whereas most of the northern hemisphere is the land world. And Earth looks a little bit like a pear in side view. So with more mass in the southern hemisphere, when the Earth can rotate freely on its orbital axis, the sun pulls on it and causes the southern hemisphere to preferentially point towards the sun because there's more mass there. It's the same.
Bruce, could you do me a favor?
Yes.
There's some background noise. Can you click your mic mute for 1 second and then turn it back on and see if that background noise goes away? And turn it back on. Okay, the noise is gone. Very good. We're getting a little roar in the background. Was saying,
well, I do have an air conditioner above my desk.
Oh, I don't think it was that. Well, it's not sounding now. Anyway, it's cleared up.
But
So
it's a very simple mechanism for producing the ice ages again and again. I mean, they've been going on for 1 to 1.5 million years, alternating every 259,000 years. You get a complete cycle of ice age, interglacial, ice age, interglacial, whereas the seesaw effect. And people keep on saying, "Oh, we're going to have another ice age soon." No, if we're going based on the past history of Earth, which is very uniform, it's going to take another 10,000 years before we get into a full advanced glacial period again. Long before any humans will be here.
okay, let's get back to the subject of why the dinosaur tracks got big. That's what Bruce is saying, that prior to this event, let's say dinosaur tracks were 1 foot long, and all of a sudden they were 3 feet long in a very short time, which means the dinosaurs grew. And this is the novel proposal that Bruce's monograph, that's what you call a scientific paper, the one I published. And folks, you can read it by going to our Substack newsletter, robertmorningstar.substack.com, and it's called the novel proposal, the Triassic ETE, the End Triassic Extinction, Mass Extinction, and the radioactive fish fossils gave Bruce a novel idea, which I think is a brilliant idea, and that's why we're bringing it to you today. Bruce, tell us, what is your theory
in that paper? Don't forget to tell your audience that there's a graph done by Dr. Paul Olson at Columbia, Lamont Doherty, that he graphs the distribution of dinosaur tracks all the way from the about 10 to 20 million years into the Triassic, and all the way up to the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, and then above. And he shows the sudden increase in size right there at the boundary. So that's where this information is data are published, so
Right.
people can see the evidence for it.
Right. So let's talk about solar activity and your theory that a micronova was responsible.
And the micronova is also responsible for melting the radiation penetrated deep into the Earth on the Atlantic side and cause the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province to start to be mobilized and to move upwards through fissures, and so you would have flood basalts within the various basins as a consequence of this energetic event that hit the Earth, but only on one side.
Explain to the audience what a micronova is.
It's where a piece of the sun breaks off and comes like a coronal mass ejecta, but it's one that includes deeper elements that have radioactive isotopes associated with them.
So it's the one half of the Earth was roasted,
Yes,
fried, and then it kind of hit the Western Hemisphere and then wrapped a little bit around the other end, but didn't really reach Asia. So that's why the Chinese geologists have not found what you have found here. They haven't found radioactive fish fossils and
right.
the
The amazing thing there is that the amount of ferns and water-loving plants that they've found crossing the boundary is amazing. They are still trying to follow in the footsteps of the Western geologists, calling it a mass extinction, but it's not. And there are those skeptics who are going to say, well, they just didn't sample the Triassic-Jurassic boundary. But then you get into the Jurassic on China, and the Jurassic is just as diverse as the Triassic, whereas in North America, the flora of the Jurassic is monotypic, meaning that it is dominated by a very small number of seed plants and ferns, only a few kinds of ferns, whereas in China, it's dominated by dozens and dozens of different types of ferns.
So on our side of the Earth, the micronova fried the fronds and lower plant life, but the conifers survived because they were sturdier. They were
Yes, their seeds survived, and they dominated, and then the dinosaurs that became the primary plant food for your long-necked, four-legged dinosaurs that could reach up to the tops of those trees. And wherever we look for the plant fossils in the Jurassic, there are always these chirolepid conifers and Araucarian conifers, just the same ones over and over again. Whereas during the Triassic, you get all sorts of other types of plants.
Some of the people that I speak with believe that micronovas are cyclic. Do you think they're cyclic or just sporadic?
Well, if they're cyclic, then, one of the things I became aware of when I was looking at changes in Earth's, that they have about 8 major extinction events throughout the Phanerozoic. And if you look at the ones that occurred in the Permian and then go up to the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, what do you have? You have about 55 million years. Then you go from the Jurassic, base of the Jurassic, up to the Cretaceous, you have another 55, 60 million years. And you go from the base of the Cretaceous up to the Tertiary, at the big extinction, and it's another 55, 60 million years. So there seems to be a pattern.
And how long ago was that last one?
65 million years ago.
All right, so it's about 10 million years late?
No, it could happen anytime.
It could happen anytime. That's what I wanted to clarify. So, folks, if you have to get something done, you better do it soon. Actually, we're making light of a serious subject because I think that's one of the best things to do instead of getting into doom and gloom. But it is a fact that there are solar prominences, and there was one recently that belted out, and fortunately, the United States, well, we do worry about our country first. I'm an America first guy. But it is said that if the Earth had been passing through that region where that solar prominence jetted out, we would have been fried. Not like a micronova, but we'd be roasty toasty. What do you think of that? And it just happened a couple of months ago, or a month and a half ago. So,
well, you've talked to Susan Johnson, haven't you?
oh, I talked to her, and I talked to other friends, and she
claims that she is an ET in a human body, and that she works with the ETs all the time. She says they are protecting Earth and preventing the CMEs, the solar flashes, from being directed at Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And
I do believe there is a guardian. You've heard of Solar Warden, right?
Yes.
Well, in 2003, I was studying some SOHO photographs. SOHO is the satellites, 2 satellites that monitor the sun all the time, and they are constantly transmitting images of the sun, but they block out the sun so you can see everything around the sun. And I found gigantic, and I mean gigantic, spaceships orbiting the sun, that region near Mercury. And I thought to myself, my God, who could have a technology like that? And then a couple of years later, I started to hear about something called Solar Warden, which seems to be this ET presence that is guarding the solar system and maybe doing that guardianship, in fact. So we have a lot to think about. Remember, the first trick of science was to convince you that you evolved from a monkey so that when they treat you like a monkey, you won't complain, as we have experienced over the last 3 years with the scamdemic and the mRNA genetic modification technology. There's a lot going on this planet that's being hidden from us. And since you brought up the subject of extraterrestrials, let's talk about your book. Your book on UFOs. Bruce and I have been studying UFOs together for 30 years, along with the moon and the Mars and this geology. Forbidden archaeology is another aspect of our research. And so Bruce spent a lot of time in a place called Pine Bush and other areas. He studies UFOs everywhere he goes because he's a contactee, as many of us are. We have had close contact and sightings of UFOs. They approach. I've told you about 9 instances of close approaches of UFOs to me, always at the same place, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. UFOs are all over New York City. I believe they're here guarding us, as well as conducting their research, which includes abductions and experiments. Folks, you don't know how many people in New York City have had intruders or space brothers or angelic extraterrestrials looking over them, and there seem to be 2 groups. One is very benevolent, humane, kind of like guardian angels, and then there's another one that's not human and malevolent and not so nice to human beings and doesn't really like life on Earth. And I think AI is the representative of that group. So let's talk about your book and your work. Let's give the title of the book.
Unconventional Aerial Phenomena in the Hudson and Walker River valleys of New York.
Right. So let's go to Pine Bush. We have about 10 minutes left, and I don't want to miss this opportunity. As you know, Bruce is a scientist, and he knows how to use a lot of scientific instruments, including a magnetometer. And Bruce did a lot of work up there at Pine Bush, which seems to be a gateway. It seems to be a portal where UFOs blink in and blink out. He's gotten videos. Many people have been up there and witnessed. I took a harrowing ride with Bruce up to Pine Bush once. We almost did it
Never get that.
at light speed. in my Firebird. And I had some spooky experiences near the graveyard. There are these areas that are really significant. One of them is a graveyard there. But Bruce did use his magnetometer to measure the magnetism, and he came to a conclusion that there is an ancient spaceship buried there that's still beaming. It's like a homing beacon for UFOs, and that's why all these UFO sightings occur in Pine Bush. Care to elucidate?
Yes. I did a 24 square mile magnetic survey, which I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of people out there saying, wait a minute, that's an awful large area, and many other researchers just aren't willing to put in that amount of time. It took me 3 years, every opportunity I had, to go out and take more readings with my magnetometer and to put it together. And in the process of doing that, I initially found out that the whole valley was sending signals out into space. Everywhere where I went, I was getting these 10 to 15,000 gamma spikes that were coming out of the ground. And this is not natural at all. I had my instrument checked out, and it was fine. And then when I went back, there were no spikes at all, except in one area around this Jewish cemetery. And I did a mapping of that and found every once in a while, every time the constellation Bootes was overhead, there were signals coming out of the ground there. And they formed a triangle about 365 feet on a side. You're talking about a giant mining probe that came here, and it's embedded within Ordovician age rocks, and that makes it at least 400 million years old. So
how deep is that? The Ordovician?
Yes, when Bill Burns got his crew, the UFO hunters, to come and do a study on this, they brought a ground-penetrating radar device, and they found it's only 9 feet below the surface, embedded in solid rock. And it goes down at least 20 feet below that, 25 feet. And it warms the earth during the winter and melts the snow. It cools the earth during the summer. And if you want to if it's like 95 degrees outside the cemetery, when you go into the cemetery over this buried probe, the temperature drops to 70 degrees. And that's amazing. And there are insects that people have noticed that are glowing, they build their nests in the ground, but they are apparently irradiated. And I've checked it with a Geiger counter, and it is radioactive. And the government knows about it. Largely because I published this information on the internet, and I've been told by the local residents that, one time a caravan of military trucks pulled up next to the cemetery, and soldiers got out and went into the cemetery, dug holes and planted something in the ground, and then took off. So they're monitoring it as well. They know it's there.
Yeah. How much higher is the radiation in that area than the general background radiation?
Not much. Just a very small amount, maybe a few percent, but enough that it's consistent.
Mm-hmm. And you believe that this puts out a beam when Bootes is one of the northern constellations. He's
right,
kind of a hunter, isn't he?
Right. It's from the center of the triangle. You have a white beam people have actually seen come out. And in one particular witness statement, they said they were there because the cemetery attracted anomalous phenomena, and ghost hunters would go there also to find the paranormal events. And they said that this one commercial airplane traveling to Stewart Airport on the other side of the valley made a turn a little bit before the red beacon on Thompson Ridge. That is usually where the aircraft turn to align with the runway on the other side of the valley. And as this aircraft passed over the cemetery and over the triangle, a beam of light came out and tracked the bottom of it for as long as it was over the triangle.
That's Bruce once asked me to overfly and take videos of this area. And then there was a TV program that covered him, CBS of all people, covered him in a short documentary. I think it was 60 minutes. So we've had a lot of adventures up there, and there's still more adventures to be had. We have about 1 minute left, so Bruce, I'll give it to you until you hear the music.
Okay. All right. Well, my work took a little over 11 years to complete, and I put all of my data out on the internet. And the CIA was very much out there investigating, and I actually got an email from the head of the CIA thanking me for all the work that I've done out there.
Oh, well, that's great. It's good to have friends in high places.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they started covering UFO Digest. They were very happy that we started publishing because nobody was reporting anything to them because they were afraid of them. So we have a lot of friends.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.